18 minutes after my mother called me, I walked into the police station. The first thing I saw was my mother's broken glasses on a metal table. One lens was missing. Blood had dried on her collar. And at 71, she was sitting behind the glass of an interview room while my husband was treated like the victim. "Ma'am, you need to wait outside," Officer Carter told me. "My mother needs a doctor. We're still determining who started the altercation." That word hit hard. Altercation. As if the bruises on her shoulder, the swelling near her temple, and the way she could barely lift one arm belonged to two people who had simply lost their tempers. Ryan had called 911 first. He told them my mother became confused, grabbed a bat, and attacked him. By the time I arrived, his story was calm and complete. Before I tell you what happened next, tell me this in the comments. Would you trust the first story or the first piece of evidence? Then my mother looked at me through the glass. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to cause trouble in your marriage." She had been beaten. She was being questioned like a suspect. And she was apologizing to me. I stepped inside and checked her pulse, pupils, and breathing. I kept my voice low. I did not yell. I did not threaten anyone. But I noticed things. Her missing lens had not been logged. Ryan had asked what she had signed. And according to his statement, she had fallen beside the fireplace. My mother did not own a fireplace. When I pointed that out, Sergeant Dalton barely looked up. "We still have two conflicting accounts." "No. We had one injured woman, one prepared story, and one detail that could not be true." What Ryan did not know was that I had spent years learning how people behave under pressure and how evidence behaves when people lie. Still, I said nothing about my past. I only asked them to get my mother treated. Then an older man walked into the station, his posture still unmistakably military despite the gray in his hair. He glanced at my uniform, then at the way my fingers rested against my mother's wrist. He stopped cold. "Major Walker?" I recognized him a second later, retired Colonel Daniel Cole. The room went silent. Ryan did not know that rank. No one else in the station did. And before I could ask how that man knew me, I realized the real question was not what had happened in that room. It was what Ryan had been preparing for weeks before he called 911. 3 weeks earlier, Ryan was still smiling across our dinner table as if nothing had changed. I had been working long shifts as a combat medic. He said his business needed his full attention, and I wanted to believe the distance between us was only stress. "How is the business doing?" I asked. "Busy. Nothing worth talking about." He immediately turned to Lily and asked about school. Later, I opened our banking app to pay a household bill. My password no longer worked. Ryan barely looked at me. "I changed it. I'll manage the accounts from now on." Lily gave me a nervous smile. "Dad is just under a lot of pressure." I said we would discuss it later. We never did. At the time, it looked like control. I did not yet understand that it was preparation. A few days after that, Ryan came with me to visit my mother. The conversation seemed harmless until he laughed and said, "Margaret forgot where she left her keys again." "I'm starting to think she's getting forgetful." My mother looked at him calmly. "I didn't lose them," she replied. "You put them in your jacket pocket after you borrowed my flashlight." For a second, Ryan froze. Then he laughed louder. "See? She's mixing up old memories." I'd changed the subject. Ryan smiled because I had done exactly what he expected. I had chosen peace over suspicion. That was my mistake. He was not questioning my mother's memory. He was teaching Lily and me not to trust it. 2 days later, my mother called and asked me to come over alone. The envelope was on her kitchen table when I arrived. It was plain, unsealed, and thick enough to hold more than a bill. "Emily, I need you to look at this." Her voice was quiet, not confused, not uncertain. Inside were financial papers with my name on them. One page referred to a loan I did not recognize. Another listed property information connected to my house. I read the first page twice. "Did Ryan give these to you?" "No. I found them mixed with documents he left here." I felt the first pull of fear. What did you see him doing? Margaret glanced toward the window. He asked whether I had signed anything. Then he wanted to know if I had already given you copies. I wanted to call Ryan immediately. Part of me still believed there had to be a reasonable explanation. A business mistake. A form under the wrong name. Anything except what the papers suggested. Then a car door slammed outside. My mother folded the papers, pushed them into the envelope, and slid it beneath a stack of magazines. Ryan entered less than a minute later. He smiled at me, kissed Lily on the forehead, then looked at Margaret. So, he said lightly, "What have you been signing lately?" My mother's hand tightened around the table. "Nothing you need to worry about." Ryan laughed. There she goes again. She probably doesn't remember what she signed or who she gave it to. His tone was calm, almost playful. That made it worse. I looked at Lily. She had heard every word. Because Ryan sounded patient, she watched my mother as if he might be right. I did not confront him that night. I chose to watch, remember, and wait for proof. But when Ryan glanced toward the magazines, I could not tell whether he had seen the envelope or whether he already knew where it was. Detective Ruiz opened the evidence list while Officer Carter stood beside her. I stayed across the table and kept my hands away from everything. Broken glasses, Ruiz read. One frame. One lens. Carter looked up. There were 2 lenses when we arrived. My stomach tightened. The missing lens had been beside the blood on my mother's collar, yet it was not in the log. Preserve her shoes, I said. And secure the house before anything is moved. Ruiz studied me, then nodded. Cole remained near the doorway and said only that he had known me years ago. For the first time, someone treated the gap like evidence. Ruiz pulled up the photographs from my mother's house. Describe the room where Ryan says she fell. There's a sofa, a low cabinet, and a window facing the driveway. No fireplace. Carter checked Ryan's statement. He said she fell against the fireplace after swinging the bat. Ruiz moved through every photograph. There was no fireplace. Not even a covered hearth. Could he have meant another room? No. The timestamp showed Ryan had mentioned it before officers showed him any scene photographs. He had not confused one detail. He had described a room from a different story. At the hospital, Dr. Patel completed the scans and examined my mother's shoulder, ribs, and temple. I understood what he was checking, but I did not guide him. He asked Margaret to show how she had been standing. I was lower than him, she said. I bent down to pick up my glasses. Dr. Patel studied the bruising again. These marks descend from above. The shoulder injury also matches force applied while she was lowered. I held my breath. Could this come from 2 people struggling equally? Ruiz asked. Not in the way these injuries are grouped. My mother closed her eyes. I took her hand, but said nothing. The evidence was still incomplete. The missing lens had not been found, and Ryan's reason for inventing the story remained hidden. But for the first time, an independent doctor saw what I had seen from the beginning. My mother had not been in an equal fight. She had been struck from above while she was already below him. Ruiz asked my mother about the baseball bat after the doctor finished examining her. Have you ever owned one like this? Margaret looked at the photograph and shook her head. I have never owned a baseball bat. I believed her. But belief was not proof. Ruiz had the evidence bag brought closer without opening it. A dark smear marked the handle. Fine metallic dust clung near the grip. That does not look like household dirt, I said. Ruiz nodded. It could be oil from a vehicle or residue from a toolbox. The residue did not prove where the bat came from. But it gave Ruiz a new place to look. If the bat had been stored near tools or vehicle oil, a camera might show how it reached my mother's house. That afternoon, I returned to the neighborhood with Ruiz. One woman stood near her mailbox and folded her arms. Ryan has always been polite, she said. Margaret worries too much. She gets confused. Another neighbor avoided looking at me. By then, Ryan had already started telling people I was using my military connections to pressure the police. Cole's recognition had become another weapon in his story. "I am not asking you to choose sides," I said. "I only need what you saw." The second neighbor hesitated. "I may have seen his truck," he admitted, "but I do not want trouble." A moment earlier, he had been willing to speak. Now fear had entered his voice. That was when I understood how difficult this would be. Ryan's smile had protected him long before the evidence could expose him. We were no longer fighting only one false statement. We were fighting an entire community that had already chosen the easier story to believe. Lily sat beside me with her hands wrapped around a cup of hot chocolate. She avoided looking at me for several seconds before speaking. "Maybe Grandma got scared," she whispered. "Dad said people can remember things wrong when they panic." The words hit me harder than I expected. Not because Lily believed them. Because they were Ryan's exact words. I forced myself to stay calm. "What do you think happened?" She looked down. "I don't know." That answer mattered more than anything else. Ryan had given her a story, but he had not taken away her ability to question it. I reached for her hand. "You never have to choose between people you love. You only have to tell the truth about what you see." Before she could answer, Karen stepped into the room. "She needs some space," Karen said gently. I nodded. As Karen led Lily away, my daughter looked back once. There was fear in her eyes. Not of me. Of the conflict she had been pulled into. Watching her leave hurt more than reading any false statement Ryan had ever signed. Later that evening, Cole found me outside the station. He studied my face for a moment. "Do you still remember Falcon 7? Only someone from my past would know that mission code." "I remember," I answered quietly. He lowered his voice. "One phone call, and people higher than this department will listen." I shook my head before he could continue. "No calls. No orders. No special treatment." He frowned. "You could end this faster." "Maybe," I said. "But if this case survives, it has to survive because the evidence stands on its own." Cole remained silent for several seconds. Then he gave a slow nod. "If anyone officially asks, I will confirm your identity. Nothing more. That is all I want." As he walked away, I realized I had chosen the longer road. It would be slower. It would be lonelier. But when the truth finally arrived, no one would be able to say it had been carried there by rank instead of evidence. Carter met us outside the interview room with a folder in his hand. "We have the phone," he said. "But most of the data is locked. We need the warrant before we can examine everything." Ruiz nodded. "What do we know so far?" "Only preliminary metadata." He placed several printed pages on the table. I forced myself not to guess ahead of the evidence. Ruiz read the reports silently before speaking. "There are searches related to head injuries." He turned another page. "And articles about how memory changes in older adults." The room became completely quiet. None of us knew exactly when those searches had been made. Without verified timestamps, they proved nothing. Ryan could have searched after the assault. Or before it. That single detail would change everything. I folded my hands together and waited. I had promised myself I would never replace evidence with suspicion. Ruiz looked at me. "We verified the timeline first." I simply nodded. That answer was enough. Later that afternoon, Ryan chose to speak in public instead of in court. He told anyone willing to listen that I was dragging the military into a private marriage. According to him, the investigation had changed only because people recognized my past. The lie spread faster than I expected. When I visited my mother, she looked exhausted. "Emily," she whispered, "maybe I should tell them I overreacted." I stared at her. "You did not overreact. I don't want your life destroyed because of me." I moved closer. "Mom, look at me. You are apologizing because you survived long enough to tell the truth." Her eyes filled. "I started all this." "No," I said. "Ryan started it when he decided your silence mattered more than your life." For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I finally understood something painful. Silence did not erase a lie. It only gave it more room to grow. I still would not use my rank. I still would not ask anyone for favors. But I would no longer mistake silence for strength. From that moment forward, I would answer every accusation with facts. Nothing more. Nothing less. I waited until Lily was ready before asking about the minutes after the attack. "What did your father say to you?" She stared at the floor. "He asked what Grandma told me. I stayed quiet. And then?" "He asked who I believed." Her voice grew smaller with every word. "Did he ask whether she was alive?" Lily looked up at me. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then her face changed. "No." I did not tell her what that meant. I did not need to. Ryan had asked about the story before asking about the woman lying injured inside it. The certainty Lily had repeated for days began to crack. Later, my mother asked Ruiz to come to the hospital. She looked frightened when we entered. "I did not tell you everything," she admitted. Ruiz sat across from her. "You can tell us now." Margaret pressed her hands together. I was ashamed. I thought if I stayed quiet, Emily might still save her marriage. I wanted to reassure her, but I let her speak. "Ryan asked about the envelope before he hit me," she continued. "He wanted to know where I put it and whether Emily had seen the papers." Her voice shook. When I refused to answer, he stepped closer. Ruiz asked only what was necessary. My mother gave the sequence slowly and clearly. Then she took the written statement. "I will sign all of it," she said. That signature did not erase her fear. It meant she had stopped protecting my marriage with her silence. The next morning, Carter found Ruiz and me near the evidence room. "I missed the second lens," he said. "That was my responsibility." Ruiz did not excuse him. "What are you doing about it?" I went back. He had reviewed traffic cameras and footage from businesses near my mother's street. Most showed nothing useful. Then he placed a still image on the table. Ryan's truck appeared at an intersection several blocks away. The timestamp matched the window before the attack. But the direction did not match his statement. Ryan had claimed he drove directly to Margaret's house after receiving her call. The camera showed him coming from somewhere else. Carter opened the recovered video. The same officer who had missed the lens had now found the first crack in Ryan's route. The camera did not prove the assault, but it exposed the first verifiable contradiction in Ryan's timeline. Ryan met Lily in a supervised room while Karen and I watched from behind the glass. At first, he smiled. Then he leaned forward. "You know Grandma gets confused sometimes." Lily did not answer. "And your mother is making this worse," he continued. "She is tearing the family apart." My hand tightened around the chair. I wanted to walk in. Instead, I waited. Ryan kept pushing. "Tell them Grandma panicked. Tell them she remembers it wrong." Lily looked at him for a long moment. Then she asked the question he was not expecting. "Why didn't you ask if Grandma was okay?" Ryan's face changed. "I knew she was fine." "No, you didn't." His voice rose. "Do not talk to me like that." I entered before he could say more. "That is enough." For the first time, I set a boundary he could not negotiate. The visit ended early. Outside, Lily was shaking. Karen sat beside her while I waited. After several minutes, Lily spoke. "Dad talked about Grandma's house before." I kept my voice calm. "What did he say?" "He said the house would solve everything if Grandma signed something. He said you were making it difficult." The words hurt, but I did not celebrate her doubt. Ryan was still her father. Seeing him clearly was already painful enough. "You do not have to protect me," I told her. "And you do not have to punish him." Lily wiped her face. "I want Detective Ruiz to know what I heard." Karen reached for her hand. I nodded. That was Lily's decision, not mine. And for the first time, the envelope, the missing signature, and my mother's house no longer looked like separate pieces. They looked like motive. Carter played the video again. Ryan's truck stopped farther from my mother's house than he had claimed. For several seconds, nothing moved. Then the driver's door opened. Ryan stepped out, walked to the rear of the truck, and unlocked the toolbox. Ruiz leaned closer to the screen. "Pause it there." Carter froze the image. Ryan's body blocked most of the view, but when he turned, something long appeared in his hand. It was wrapped or partially covered. The shape was unclear. The timing was not. Carter displayed the camera clock beside the 911 record. This was before the emergency call, he said. I watched Ryan carry the object out of frame. I did not call it the bat. Not yet. But one possibility had changed. The weapon had not simply appeared inside my mother's house during an argument. Someone had brought a long object from Ryan's truck before anyone called for help. Ruiz looked at me. This strengthens the warrant requests. It does not finish the case. I know. For the first time, trusting the process did not feel like helplessness. It felt like movement. But the next report took that hope and turned it into something colder. Briggs met us in the evidence room with photographs of Ryan's shoes. We examined the soles, he said. There are multiple glass fragments embedded in the tread. Ruiz placed the recovered lens beside the images. Can you connect them? Briggs pointed to several microscopic features. The refractive characteristics are consistent. So are the coating layers and fracture patterns. I stared at the photograph. One fragment had been pressed deep into the sole. Ruiz asked, "What does the distribution suggest?" That he was close to the broken lens after it shattered, Briggs answered. Possibly standing where the pieces were concentrated. My mother's glasses had broken when she fell. Ryan had claimed he stayed several feet away. The evidence said otherwise. I pictured Margaret on the floor. Then I pictured Ryan's shoe coming down among the shattered glass beside her face. The image was not a memory. It was worse. It was a physical truth built from fragments too small for him to notice. He had not merely been inside the room. He had stood over my mother after she went down. Dr. Patel and Briggs compared the injury photographs beside the recovered lens. Patel traced the angle of my mother's head wound. The impact came from above and slightly behind her, she said. Her injuries are consistent with a sudden strike, followed by a fall. Briggs turned to the photographs of Ryan's hands. The scratches he reported were documented later, he said. They do not match a struggle of equal force. Ruiz looked at him. What do they match? Handling broken glass. Possibly after the lens shattered. I felt hope rise, but I forced it back down. Evidence was not a verdict. Patel continued. Margaret had defensive bruising, but there is no medical indication that she attacked him with comparable force. The blood pattern, the broken glasses, and the direction of her injuries all supported the same sequence. Ryan had not been defending himself from my mother. By that afternoon, Ruiz received notice that Ryan had changed his statement. For the first time, he admitted touching the broken glasses. He claimed he had only moved them to help Margaret. The evidence had forced him to rewrite his story. Then the official verification request returned. Cole met Ruiz and me privately. I can confirm Emily's former rank, he said. She served as a major in a specialized medical response unit. Ruiz asked, and you knew her personally? Cole paused. I knew her through a sealed mission. That is the limit of what I am authorized to say. I had agreed to verify my identity. I had not agreed to open the entire record. My military file is not evidence in this case, I said. Ruiz nodded. The civilian case stands on its own. That mattered more than hearing anyone call me Major. Cole could confirm who I had been. He could not prove what Ryan had done. If you believe stories like this deserve to be followed until the truth is fully uncovered, subscribe and stay with me. Because once the facts began closing around Ryan, he stopped defending his story and started attacking mine. His attorney accused me of using military influence to intimidate investigators and destroy his reputation. Cole looked at me. He is trying to make your past the story. I understood immediately. Ryan could no longer control the evidence. So he would try to control what everyone believed about me. Carter placed Ryan's phone records beside the search timeline. The metadata is clean, he said. These searches were made before he arrived at Margaret's house. Ruiz read the terms aloud. Symptoms after a head injury. How memory changes in older adults. When elderly witnesses are considered unreliable. The room went silent. I had spent days trying to understand how an argument became violence. Now the answer was harder to accept. It had not begun with anger. Ryan had searched for the story he would tell before he ever reached my mother's door. He was preparing the explanation, I said. Ruiz did not soften it. Yes, the false narrative existed before the first blow. I thought of my mother apologizing through the interview room glass. Ryan had not called her confused because he panicked after hurting her. He had chosen those words before he arrived. The cruelty was not only in the attack. It was in preparing the world not to believe her afterward. That discovery led Monroe back through the financial records. She placed a loan file in front of me. It is tied to family property, she said. Your information appears throughout the application. I studied the signature. It looked like mine from a distance. Up close, the pressure and letter spacing were wrong. I was on duty that day, I said. I could not have signed this. Monroe turned to the transfer history. The funds moved through 2 accounts. The final destination was Ryan's business. The betrayal felt different from the violence. He had used my name as if it belonged to him. Ruiz asked, would Margaret have known about the property documents? Yes. She kept copies of everything important. That was why Ryan had asked about the envelope. But one question remained. What exactly had my mother kept? When we returned to the hospital, Margaret closed her eyes and tried to remember. I copied the papers before he came, she said. I did not trust the numbers. Where did you put the second copy? I asked. Her eyes opened. Not at the house. Karen followed the location Margaret gave her and returned with a sealed folder. Ruiz opened it carefully. Inside were copies of the property ownership records, the loan application, and the transfer documents. The dates aligned. The signatures did not. One page showed that part of the loan depended on Margaret's ownership interest. Another showed money moving toward Ryan's company. I stared at the papers until the marriage I had been trying to preserve no longer looked real. Ryan had not only needed my mother silent. He needed everyone to believe she was confused before she could explain what she had found. The searches on his phone, the missing envelope, and the attack were no longer separate events. They were parts of the same plan. The recording from Lily's supervised visit was reviewed one more time. This time, no one focused on his tone. They listened to his words. Ryan believed Lily was still on his side. She has to sound confused, he said. If people think Grandma remembers everything clearly, none of this will work. Lily stayed quiet. Ryan continued. They only need to believe she isn't thinking straight. After that, the papers won't matter. Ruiz paused the recording. No one spoke. The statement connected everything we had uncovered. The searches. The attack. The missing envelope. The property documents. Ryan had never been trying to prove the truth. He had been trying to destroy my mother's credibility before she could speak. For the first time, the prosecutors were looking at intent instead of coincidence. Later that evening, Cole asked if he could speak with me alone. I owe you one truth, he said. I nodded. Years ago, during an evacuation mission, our convoy was hit. Communications failed. Medical support was gone. He looked down for a moment. You took temporary command of the medical response. I remembered the smoke, the noise, the wounded. I only did my job. No, Cole replied quietly. You kept me alive. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. The memory belonged to another life. Finally, he said, that is how I recognized you the moment I saw your name. I looked at him. That record cannot prove Ryan is guilty. I know. And it should never be used that way. Cole nodded. It will not. When he left, I felt something unexpected. Not victory. Not relief. Only the quiet certainty that my past could explain who I was. But only the evidence could prove what Ryan had done. Monroe spread the entire timeline across the conference table. No single piece of evidence stood at the center. That was the point. The camera establishes movement, she said. The medical findings establish the injuries. The broken lens supports proximity. The phone searches establish preparation. The financial records establish motive. Ruiz looked at each section without interrupting. Monroe continued. None of these depends on another to exist. Each one stands on its own. I stayed quiet. For weeks, I had felt responsible for proving everything myself. Now I watched the system do exactly what it was designed to do. The assault. The false report. Witness tampering. Financial fraud. Each charge was taking shape from evidence that could survive on its own. Ryan's attorney asked for one more interview. When it began, Ryan offered his fourth version of what had happened. This time he claimed he had gone to my mother's house only because she had asked him to help with paperwork. Monroe slid the surveillance images across the table. The camera shows you removing an object from your truck before you entered. Ryan looked away. He changed direction again. I panicked after she fell. Ruiz answered calmly. The 911 call and your earlier statements do not support that. Silence filled the room. Then Ryan made one final attempt. This started because Emily wanted control of the property. She pushed everyone against me. No one looked at me. Monroe answered with the documents instead. The loan application used Emily's identity. The money moved into your business. The internet searches occurred before you arrived. Those facts existed before Emily spoke to investigators. Ryan lowered his eyes. Every new version had made the earlier evidence stronger. Every change confirmed that the story had been prepared long before the assault. For the first time, I understood that I no longer needed to defend myself. The evidence was doing that for me. Ryan was still trying to change the story, but he could no longer change the facts. Monroe presented the evidence in the order it had been discovered. Patel began with my mother's injuries. The wound pattern places Margaret below the attacker, she said. The direction of impact does not support a struggle between equals. Briggs followed with the broken lens and the fragments from Ryan's shoe. The glass places him beside her after the lens shattered, he said. His scratches are consistent with handling the debris afterward. Then Carter displayed the truck footage, the phone searches, and the timestamps. Ryan had removed a long object before entering the house. He had searched head injuries and the credibility of older witnesses before the attack. Monroe placed the financial documents beside the screen. The loan created the motive, she said. Margaret had copies proving her ownership interest was used, and the money ultimately reached Ryan's business. I listened without looking at him. Every detail hurt, but I did not want revenge. I wanted the truth to remain clear after everyone left the room. Monroe faced the court. This case does not depend on Emily's military history, Margaret's memory, or Ryan's reputation. The medical evidence, physical evidence, digital records, and financial trail independently support the same conclusion. The truth was no longer two competing stories. It was one chain, with every link pointing in the same direction. When the decision came, I held Margaret's hand. Lily sat beside me. Ryan stood without looking at either of us. The court found that the assault had been planned, followed by a false report, an effort to discredit Margaret, witness manipulation, and financial fraud. Ryan tried to speak. For months, he had changed the meaning of every event whenever the facts cornered him. This time, he could not. The court defined what had happened. Not Ryan. Not me. The evidence did. I did not feel triumphant when he was convicted. I looked at Lily first. Then I looked at my mother. Margaret's fingers tightened around mine as the judge referred to her by name. Not as the confused woman Ryan had described. Not as a suspect in her own assault. As the victim. Her eyes filled with tears. So they believe me, she whispered. I leaned closer. They know the truth. Justice had finally arrived. But as I watched my mother lower her head and Lily wipe her face, I understood something else. A verdict could end Ryan's control over the story. It could not erase what that story had done to us. Carter and Dalton asked to meet my mother before we left the station. Neither of them carried a notebook. Neither tried to defend what had happened. Carter spoke first. We believed the version that was easier to accept, he said. We questioned Margaret before we questioned the evidence. Dalton nodded. We should have followed the signs instead of the story. My mother listened without interrupting. She looked smaller than she had before the trial. But she did not look afraid anymore. After a long silence, she answered, "I accept that you're sorry." Neither man moved. "But if another older woman walks in tomorrow, and she has no daughter beside her, your apology will not protect her." The words settled over the room. Carter lowered his head. "It won't happen the same way again." He explained that the department had already begun changing its elder abuse procedures. Medical evidence would be reviewed earlier. Victim interviews would no longer outweigh physical evidence. Officers would receive additional training. My mother gave a slow nod. "Then make sure this changes someone else's ending." As we walked outside, I realized she had offered accountability instead of forgiveness. That mattered more. A few days later, Lily asked if she could spend the afternoon with both of us. We sat together on the back porch. For a long time, none of us spoke. Finally, Lily looked at me. "I wanted to believe Dad," she whispered. The truth hurt too much. I reached for her hand. "You don't have to pretend you never loved him." She looked surprised. Margaret smiled gently. "Loving someone doesn't require protecting the choices they made." Lily wiped her eyes. "I don't know how to feel." "You don't have to decide today," I said. "You're allowed to miss him," Margaret added. "You're also allowed to tell the truth." The weight on Lily's shoulders seemed to ease. She leaned against me for the first time in months. My mother placed her hand over both of ours. "No one asked us to forget. No one asked us to hate. We simply chose something different. We chose honesty. We chose boundaries. We chose a family where silence would never again be mistaken for love." The court had given us justice. What we built after that would be entirely our own. A few months later, I sat with my mother and Lily at the kitchen table. The house felt different. Not untouched, but safe. Cole had already left quietly, without asking for credit or attention. My mother folded her hands. "For weeks, I kept apologizing," she said. "For surviving. For remembering. For making everyone uncomfortable with the truth." She looked at me. "I'm done apologizing." Lily reached across the table and held her hand. I had also made my final decision. I would not return to military service. That part of my life had taught me discipline, endurance, and honor. But it had not won the case. The evidence had done that. Honor had simply kept me from abandoning the truth when giving up would have been easier. Ryan would never again have access to my mother, my daughter, or me. For years, I had believed protecting a family meant keeping it together. Now I understood that sometimes protection means closing the door permanently on the person causing the harm. We did not rebuild our lives through revenge. We rebuilt them through truth, boundaries, and the decision to stop apologizing for surviving. Have you ever had to choose between protecting someone you love and keeping the peace? Sometimes the bravest answer is refusing to stay silent.